Next statement. All students are mathematically capable. Always, sometimes, or never true.
Always with my full chest. Always true. Every student is math capable. You?
Happy 2026, everybody. Welcome to another new year and another episode of the Educators Mathcast. I'm here with my buddy Mike, and we're excited to chat today about some hot takes, Mike. And surprisingly for us, it's not going to involve any chicken today, which I'm very excited about. But we are going to make some hot takes here using a framework that we really love. So Mike and I love this routine called always, sometimes, and never. I don't know if you've used it in your classroom before, but you would pose a statement to your class, something like an odd number plus an odd number always equals an even number, and they would make conjectures about whether that's always true, sometimes true, or never true. Fun debates and conversations happen using that framework. We love it. And we thought today for our episode, we would take some like teacher belief statements and we would place those in our own sort of buckets of always, sometimes, or never true. And I think the first one we're going to start with here, Mike, is one we hear a lot in the math ed circles that we work in, and that is that group work is superior to individual work. So I'm going to ask you, Mike, to take that statement and place that in an always, sometimes, or never bucket.
All righty. Well, I'm going to go sometimes true. It's sometimes true that group work is superior, and I think here's why. It definitely jump in, Zach, with this, because I know you have feelings about this too, is like we've all been in situations where just for ourselves that the group sometimes disrupts our own thinking, right? I've been in situations where, like, for example, in math, just a good point is like I'm kind of the person that needs a little bit of processing time. I just need to get my teeth into the problem first and think about it a little bit before people start posing solutions and starting to move through. And this sometimes happens even like on our play dates and stuff in different breakout rooms, is like people sort of get on something and it starts moving, and before we know it, like that idea is the thing everyone's talking about. And I may or may not have a connection to that idea, or I may have still been marinating on just my entry point to the problem. And so that's just a case where group work is not superior. Like in those cases where I might want a little bit of alone time in there, or so there's a case for where it's not. But that being said, I also come from like the belief of that group work is really helpful in a lot of cases. We can quote Graham Fletcher, all of us are smarter than one of us. And there is something when you co-create things together and when you push on each other's ideas and things, there's power in the group work, but it's not always superior, because there are times where we do want some alone time. That's one spot. I've got more to talk about with it, but I'm curious where you fall and what your thoughts are.
Yeah. As someone who believes deeply that like what Graham believes and that what you're talking about, that like I love bouncing ideas off each other. I do just think there are times where working on your own can be beneficial. One of them might be in a practice space, right? Where maybe I'm practicing a skill or I'm practicing something that I want to get better at, even outside of mathematics, but in mathematics in particular, those practice problems at times are good for me to reflect on my own ways, right? I want to think about what's most efficient for me in these moments, as opposed to trying to like meet in the middle on something. So strategy work is another example. So like when our young students are learning to a variety of ways to add single and multi-digit numbers, let's say, like I might want to work on some of those on my own after I have worked in groups, because now I want to practice the ones that work for me, or I want to practice the ones that the numbers dictate for me. And I don't really want to bounce ideas off other people. I want to like get in and kind of dig in there. So I think practice problems and strategy work are two times for me where I think group work may not always be superior. So I would put it in the sometimes category as well.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, Zach, is like just realizing the way you and I answered this question is we both answered it as learners, right? We didn't answer it as teachers, right?
Oh,
but you started with the belief that like, this is a teacher belief, right? That group work is superior. And yet we both thought about it from our experiences as learners. And I'm curious now, maybe can we think about like, as from a teacher's perspective, like, is it still sometimes true for you? So I can say for me, like, I still think it's sometimes true because I remember, so you probably had this experience too, like when you're first teaching and you're teaching to the class, right? And you're asking questions of the class and hands are going up and kids are answering the right questions, right? And so every question you ask gets answered correctly, and then the lesson's over and you can feel like, man, I nailed it because they all got it, right? And they all, meaning the 4 kids I called on. And then when you actually do individualized assessments, you realize like, oh, crap, a third of the class doesn't have it, right? It's So there's a place like where group work is helpful in the learning process, but like superior is such a loaded word, but it's like
it is.
Individual work is also really important for that individual consolidation, and even for teachers to assess, like to get a sense of like what does each student know on their own, along with what do they know as a group. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as always, I think it's a blend of these two things. But it's so interesting, Mike, that you pointed that out, that we both talked about it as learners. But as a teacher, I would lean probably more heavily on group work, or at least the option for group work was always like a thing, right? Like even if you're working independently, if you want to grab a buddy or a friend and like chat about something, I always encourage that. But I think there's a logistic standpoint of like group work always being the go-to can be challenging as a teacher from a space standpoint, from like being able to check in with people standpoint, right? When you're talking at groups, it might be helpful that you get to sort of 2 or 3 groups at the same amount of time you might get to 2 or 3 students. But like, again, what you're pointing out, Mike, that's so important is you're not hearing from everybody. And generally speaking, in those groups, you have someone, even when they're visibly random, you have someone who is kind of taking the lead on the conversation, right? And you might be getting that false sense of security that like everyone gets what's going on when it might just be a smaller portion of the group.
Yeah. And just one other thing now that you made me just think of with this is like, so again, the way we talked about it was we talked about as learners and we talked about as teachers, and it's sort of like we're saying how much we value group work, and then we're saying there's a place for individual work, right? And we go to that statement that it's group work is superior, and we're saying it's sometimes true. And so maybe one argument I can also say where like group work is inferior, which is like the opposite, right? Like this would be a case for like why it's sometimes. So sometimes it's superior, sometimes it's inferior. Is like we've all like there are times where students can either on purpose or just by the nature of the way the group is working, not actually do much thinking or learning in a group, in a particular group, right? If a group is like jumping off on a point and they've got an idea, the one student may be in the group not understanding it, but it's about getting toward the answer. The group gets it, they nod and smile and stuff. And that in some ways the group work could inhibit students' learning by not giving them access. Because right when one thing that comes up with group work is there's a responsibility on the group. And I think of Peter Liljedahl, and like that he has that idea around with groups is that one expectation is everyone in the group is responsible for the thinking and learning of everyone in the group. And that's a really good thing. It's something I know when I'm teaching in the classrooms, I'll make that very explicit for students, and they don't all do it, right? And so in those cases where they aren't doing that, at least for that group or those few groups where they aren't being responsible for the thinking and learning of everyone in the group, that experience is not superior for some kids. So just another thing just to kind of toss out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. You want to tackle another one?
Let's do it, buddy. Bring us the next one.
All right. Here's a big one. So a belief that is stated sometimes is that explicit instruction is necessary in the math classroom. Always, sometimes, or never true, Zach?
Mike, you know me. I am a purebred constructivist. I believe in the core of my being that kids show up with ideas and that they can make sense of our world through the experiences that we give them, both in group work and individual work. But I believe that. I do believe that in the core of my soul. However, in the math classroom, I think there are moments, there are ideas, there are concepts that we humans created, and we can set them up to explore those and understand those and be playful with those. But at some point, I do believe there are times where I need to be explicit in my instruction. For example, I think that the order of operations is something that I want kids to play with, and I want them to like see what happens if they don't use the thing we've agreed upon. But at some point, I need to tell them, hey, here's what we decided is the order of operations. Here is the rule we came up with. I think it's similar in some of the geometry work that we do, that like I want them to be playful and I want them to try and draw, sort of draw different shapes and learn about the attributes of shapes. But at some point I need to say, like, this is the definition of a quadrilateral. This is how we have agreed that we will define a quadrilateral. We won't bring up trapezoids right now, Mike. It's not worth it. But my answer to your question is that it is also sometimes true, even though it hurts this constructivist to say that. I do believe it's sometimes true.
I like it. And you know what, Zach? I mean, this is no surprise probably to people listening to. I agree with you. I think you and I hold a lot of similar beliefs. But I want to cite something that a different resource around this. So this year I've been reading Productive Math Struggle by Kevin Dykema and John Sangiovanni, Susie Catt. It's been a really good book. I've been using it with teachers and using the ideas. And there's a part in the book where they talk about the ways we respond to struggle. And there's like a continuum. And it starts, the very first thing is telling. Just tell the kid the thing, right? If they're having trouble with something, just tell them what to do. Then there's sort of it's like, of course, I'm going to forget there's probing guidance, and then there's there's directed guidance and probing guidance and affordance. There, I pulled it out of the ether.
Look at you.
Look at that, right? I just need a minute, just that moment of panic, like, oh crap. But here's the thing, like, so you start with telling, right? That's direct instruction.
Yeah.
And then there's directed guidance, right? I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And that's a little bit more where you're asking questions, but it's almost like funneling questions in a way. You're sort of like guiding very heavily. Then there's probing guidance, which is more like, how might you approach this? Like, what's a strategy that you might use? And so I'm asking questions that require that student to sort of pull on the idea. And then there's affordance, which is sort of presenting opportunities for students to be able to figure that out. So we could say, like, so we've got a lot of tools in the classroom, and what could help you to solve this? So the student actually has to figure out, versus like me saying, like, what's a strategy that we've been exploring that might be helpful? I'm sort of opening it up and giving students the opportunity to make that connection themselves. And so the first two, they say rescue answers, and the second two rescue thinking. And the idea is, like, there's nothing wrong with any one of those things at any given time, but it feels like the default is, like, if you can do sort of the rescuing thinking as your go-to, the beginning part, that's sort of the optimal thing to do. And you don't want to spend 15, 20 minutes with a student constantly probing and like, well, what about this? Right. Is there something else you could do? Right? Because at some point you have to move things on a bit. And so the idea is, like, the way we've kind of been using this is that you maybe start with some affordance or starting with some probing guidance, and then you move into more directed, or just for time, it's like, all right, you've thought about it a lot. We've explored it a little bit. Let me just tell you the thing to do here to move things along a little bit. And I find that true, like, when I was teaching second grade, where I would have kids just fixate on, like, counting everything, even though they could count on. I knew they could count on, but they would just hold on to those strategies. So, like, those are times where I would say, hey, I know you like to use this strategy. I'd actually like to see you today try this using a count on strategy instead. So I want you to hold that first number, and then I want you to count on from there. And it's not, and I feel like that's still direct instruction in a way. It's like, it's explicit instruction but it's not my lead. It's like, we've been here for a while. We've explored for a while. I have evidence that the student can think this way. I'm going to explicitly push them in this direction. And I feel like that's a case where it's also, where it can work. But that my default is constructivism. My default is to let students build those connections. So it's sometimes true, not always true.
Okay, Mike, we have a self-imposed deadline, you guys, of 15-minute episodes. I think we push here, man. Let's do these last two, but do them quickly. You okay with that?
Let's do it. Lightning round.
Okay.
Bring it.
Yeah, here we go. All right. So Next statement, speaking of believing that kids can do it. All students are mathematically capable. Always, sometimes, or never true.
Always with my full chest. Always true. Every student is math capable. You?
Yeah, man. Read the work. Yeah. Listen to Vanessa. Listen to Liesel. Come on. Say it with your chest, Mike. I love that you said that, right? Like that's in the core of my soul. Each and every kid that I have the pleasure and the gift of learning alongside is mathematically capable at every age, at every space in their journey. So always true.
Yeah.
Tee us up the last one, buddy. Let's hear it.
All right, we got it. I hear this a lot. Students have to master the basic facts in order to solve problems, or before they can solve problems. Either way.
I'm going to go with never. I'm leading there, and maybe there's a little bit of gray area there that leads into sometimes, but I'm going to stick hard with never on this in my brain here. Here's what I believe. Here's what the research suggests, and here's what I've seen in my classroom: is that when you set kids up to solve problems, then they can do that. They can make sense of it on their own using manipulatives or other representations or other strategies or counting strategies. And while they might not solve them in what we might consider the most efficient way, they can, and they have shown me time and time again that they can solve problems prior to mastery or understand or like recall of basic facts. The work of Tom Carpenter and Linda Levy and Susan Empson, that whole team in CGI showed us this. There's decades of research to support that not only can they, the story problem or the problems themselves are the vehicle to understanding and becoming quick or fast or mastering your basic facts. So never true. I'm holding strong on that one.
I'm right with you on that. And for the same reasons. I think I actually went to a session years ago with Megan Franke led it. I think she was showing videos. It was either Megan or Elham. I can't remember now, but it was videos of students who were solving problems before they really had the counting sequence down. Like these were young kids, and they were showing kids using problem-solving behaviors and things. So it kind of pushed on this idea of pushing back against that idea that there's a progression. Like you have to do this before you do this. Like that statement saying students have to master makes it feel like that there's a linear progression, and that's not how learning works. That's not how math works. It's just not. It's very fluid, and you jump between skills and back and forth, and so sometimes, as you said, the problem solving helps to reinforce some of that computation practice to build that. So I'm right with you. That is also never true.
All right, you all. Well, we have been so grateful. Mike and I have received lots of comments and text messages and emails from those of you that are listening and providing your thoughts on whatever we're talking about. Let us know. What do you think about these belief statements? Where do you fall on that progression and always, sometimes, never? And we will catch up with you in a few weeks at our next Voices from the Field podcast. We'll see you there. Bye, everybody.